Hey everyone, happy Sunday to you. I hope all is well. Good job on your DBs this week. I wanted to just kind of wrap up this week with the 12-step model as we have been looking at it from an AA and ACA perspective. We'll talk more. We'll pick 12-step model up again when it comes down to Celebrate Recovery, which is a Christian-based 12-step program. You'll have a choice between that and Refuge Recovery, which is a 12-step program based on Buddhism principles. They're very different than AA. There's some similarities, certainly. But that said, I think there's like 200 and I forget the exact number, 230, 240, somewhere in there, programs that use the anonymous in the title or the 12-step model in some way. There's a caffeine anonymous. There's an Debtors Anonymous, under earners is what I'm trying to say. Anonymous. There's so many anonymous, Infidelity Anonymous. This 12-step model is a good model for most people. Not for everyone, right? But for most people. And that's what we want to learn and have these experiences so that we can at least educate our clients on what's available and have some knowledge as to their philosophies, a little bit of history, how they work, etc. We're not here to influence them to go to any of them in particular. Hey, I went to AA, it worked for me. Or hey, I went to CA, it worked for me. None of that matters, right? We want to say, here's some potential benefits, or what do you even ask? What do you think the benefits may be for you? Here's what I can tell you about the program. Blah, 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 right? Like, that's why it's so important we get educated on their philosophies and how they operate. And I just think attending is really the only way to do that. So, that said, if you attended a CA meeting or an AA meeting, I would encourage you to attend an NA meeting at some point in your life, sooner than later, probably. If you have never attended an Al-Anon or an ACA meeting, I would encourage you to attend those too. I think most of you found some value in attending this meeting. I would just encourage you to do that. We owe that to our clients, to be knowledgeable on what's out there and what's available, right? You've heard me say it before. I'll say it throughout the semester. We're only as good as our resources. Like, I'm a pretty good counselor, I think, but I'm only as good as my resources. I can't do it all, nor do I want to do it all. Nor do I have to do it all. That's the key, right? We want to do what's best for our clients, and being educated on what's available is what's best for our clients. So 12-step model in a nutshell. They believe in what's called the medical model, the disease concept. You have this disease for those that have a substance use disorder. It hijacks the brain's reward center. That classifies it as a brain disease. You admit you have this problem. You work this 12-step model of living. You get a sponsor. You go to these meetings. A sponsor is just a mentor, if you will, somebody that's been through the step work before at the program. And you live by these principles, and that their philosophy is you can never drink. They believe in identifying as I'm an alcoholic, or I'm an addict. If I'm in those NAAA, CA, whatever, I have, you already know how I feel about labels. In those settings, in the self-help settings, great. That's fine. In a clinical setting, you need to reevaluate the language you use. And there's lots of research to support why that's of value. Again, in those settings, that program, AA in particular, that started all the 12-step philosophies, they were formed in 1930s. Who am I to argue with something that's been around 90 plus years? But again, no matter how it's presented, it's not treatment. It's not clinical care. It's a self-help group or a mutual aid group, to be more specific, right? And it's wonderful. And I mean, look, I'll share with you that's how I got sober personally. That's how I became abstinent from alcohol, was AA. So it worked great for me, great-ish. It worked, right? It changed my life. I have nothing but love for that program. However, from a clinical perspective, I can't jam that down on anybody. And that's not for me to do. It may not work. The people may have fundamental disagreements with the philosophies. And so you have to be mindful of that. So, great program. You'll hear me say this about all the programs: CA, CMA, Crystal Meth Anonymous. NA, Narcotics Anonymous. All of them are great programs. SMART, Celebrate, Refuge, Recovery Dharma. They're just not always a good fit for your client, right? And so, to wrap that up, it's a solid program. Again, they're all solid programs. So yeah, keep that in mind. Moving forward this week, we talk about co-occurring disorders, and then the following week, treatment settings. And this is where you're going to see a lot of this. Every treatment center offers co-occurring disorder care, right? Like dual diagnosis, but to what extent? I can write anything on a website and make it work, right? Make it present a certain way. You have two types of treatment centers. A mental health facility. You really have three types. You have a mental health primary facility, a substance use primary facility, and then you have what I call you have really mental health care, and they get expensive and they're very different than your local psychiatric facilities. If there's ever a life or death concern, get them anywhere they're safe. It's the local psychiatric facility is great. Now they all have, most of them have programs, IOPs, PHPs, those kinds of things. Most of them do substance use disorder care in some way. But you don't want to send somebody with a primary substance use disorder to a mental health facility. That's not going to be helpful. Even if they have a co-occurring disorder, that can be very hurtful. So, it's our jobs as LCDCs. Yes, we don't diagnose mental health issues. We need to be familiar because the majority of our clients are going to have some sort of co-occurring disorder. Anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, any mood disorder. I mean, there's just so many, right? Now, we want to be careful not to follow falling down the trap, that didn't make sense, but we don't want to go down the road of, putting everybody in a box and saying, well, you're bipolar or you have depression because you're depressed. I have anxiety, legitimately. I don't have a disorder though, right? I have characteristics of an anxiety disorder at times, sure. I have characteristics of codependency. I have characteristics of depression. I have characteristics of a lot of things, but I don't have those disorders. So we have to be very careful with those and think about, again, hitting somebody with a label. We always want to separate person from disorder. I'm not an addict or an alcoholic. I'm a person. I'm Dan, who has a substance use disorder. I'm Dan, who has bipolar disorder. I don't, but I'm saying, I don't know why I need to tell you that, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like, we separate those. We don't identify as the addict or the alcoholic. And many people do in those groups, and it's okay, right? I'm not here to change that. We're talking about thinking as clinicians now, though, right? And as a clinical person, we want to be mindful of how we use our language and the labels we use. So, as in 1305, you're coming up on treatment plan assignment, co-occurring disorders is important to be familiar with. All right, it's our role to be familiar. We don't diagnose it. We can't, as LCDCs, our scope of practice is substance use. However, do we work with it? 100%. How do we not, right? The key phrase is an LCDC is working with it as it relates to their substance use disorder. Last I checked, anxiety and depression, for example, exacerbate substance use. Which came first, the chicken or the egg, right? At some point though, whichever came first, if I'm using alcohol or drugs to self-medicate for the depression or the anxiety, or if I just started out just, quote, partying with friends, and then it became this disorder, developed into this disorder, and now it's causing depression and anxiety, right? So we have to be familiar with it, as I've said, but we don't diagnose it. But what I'm getting to here in 1305's treatment plan is it's most likely a treatment plan statement or a problem statement, right? We have one diagnosis, substance use as LCDCs, always going to be the substance use, alcohol use disorder, cocaine use disorder, cannabis use disorder, anxiolytic use disorder, stimulant use disorder, right? You get the idea. That's got to be our primary diagnosis as LCDCs, is the substance use, and it's always going to be our first problem statement. But then our next problem statements can be family conflict, mental health issues, for example, as evidenced by client reports symptoms of depression that include anhedonia, fatigue, sadness, sleep disturbances. You get the idea, right? We can still put it in a treatment plan and address it in some way, but it's as it relates to the substance use disorder, and it'll never be our primary as LCDCs. And if it is, that's where we refer out. We get with supervision, we get with supervisors, we get with other clinical staff, and we learn to refer that out, right? So sorry, my dogs are going to freak out for a second. Let me